Good morning, everyone. I'm Zach. I'm the lead pastor here at Restore. So excited that you are joining us for our live stream today. It's actually kind of a momentous Sunday in that today is our last live stream only, the last time, hopefully forever, where we are only online. As of next week, we'll be back in person at Lively Middle School. The week after that, we've got a big serve day. And then the week after that, August 29th, we'll be back every single week. So just so you know, if you don't live in Greater Austin, we will be live streaming all of those in addition to being in person. But today is the last kind of online only hopefully, like I said, forever. And today's a special day because we've got a bonus summer mixtape for you. In just a few minutes, you're going to hear the interview that I did with Mike Goldsworthy, who's a former pastor in California, talking all about just what it means to be a pastor. He also works with pastors all across the country, and you're going to get to hear kind of challenges that are kind of facing pastors. One of the questions I get all the time from people is like, what's the best thing about being a pastor? What's the worst thing? What's the hardest thing? And so we're asking Mike those questions, not just of him, but of all the pastors that he works with. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Now, if you want to stay connected, not just with mixtapes that we've done in the past, but with our reopening sequence as we move forward toward that, the best way to do it is to go to restoreaustin.org/connect. On there, you can fill out the connect card, get all the information that you need. You can be kept up to date with weekly emails, social media posts, things like that. It's also a great way to take a next step in getting more plugged in, whether that's with a small group or a volunteer team or anything like that. You can check all the appropriate boxes on there. And then those go to my inbox after you fill it out. And so I'll reach back out to you, email or text message, whatever you put on there. And I would love to not just answer your questions, but get to know you a little bit. Maybe have coffee or a conversation over Zoom or something like that where I can hear your story, get to know you, answer any questions that you have. It's just one of my very favorite things to do, to meet everyone who takes that next step at Restore. So if you'd like to do that, you can go to restoreaustin.org/connect. Another great way to get involved with what's happening here at Restore is to give financially. So if you go to restoreaustin.org/give, you can set up a recurring gift. You can give one time on there. It's safe and secure. And here's the thing we say all the time, that when you are generous with our church, we're able to be generous with our community and people in need, both here and around the world. So you can do that, restoreaustin.org/give, or you can do that through Venmo or PayPal if you're more comfortable there. Now, as I said earlier, we've got some really exciting things coming up. So take a look at our schedule for the reopening sequence here in August. We had our first indoor gathering last Sunday, our first one in the August sequence, childcare 5 and under. It was awesome. Today we've got the bonus mixtape. Next week, another indoor gathering with childcare for 5 and under. The week after that, we have got an all-church party and serve day, a chance for you to bring school supplies, a chance for you to do beautification projects to make sure that the school is in tip-top shape, Lively Middle School, for these students that are coming back, many of them for the first time in a year, to step into a classroom. So we're super excited about that. We'll also have free Kona Ice truck out there for everyone to use. We'll have lunch, hot dogs grilled. It'll be so much fun. Just hang out with the church family, serve together, and party together a little bit. And then the big one to get on your calendar, August 29th, our grand reopening. From there, we're going to be back every single Sunday, 10 a.m. at Lively Middle School, and it's going to be awesome. Now, again, I want to say, even if you are not here in Greater Austin, we have got all of our services will be live streamed in addition to being in person. So you can continue to engage in that online community that you are a part of. It'll be interactive and awesome. And so we hope you do that. Now, as I said, next Sunday is going to be really fun. We're going to continue this little 2-part series. Last week I talked about why I'm still a Christian. Well, this next Sunday we're going to talk about why I'm still part of a church and why that still really matters. Connecting with healthy community and being a part of something that is greater than ourselves. So for all of the issues that church may have, we still believe that it's so important to dive deeply into that healthy, Jesus-centered community. So I'd love for you to be a part of that. Now I want to turn it over to Taylor and our band for worship.
Good morning, Restore family. We're so happy you are joining us this morning, and we're so excited that we're going to be transitioning to being together in person. But I'm so excited that we can have another online experience with you guys. I want you to join us in worship and singing. We're going to sing about anticipating who the Lord is and the great things that He does for us. So let's sing together. I feel anticipation. It feels like when wind blows through the trees. There's a hope and I can taste it. Ready to explode inside our praise. I can hear you calling, and it takes my breath away. feel your spirit moving. Come and multiply my faith. So open every door, let earth and heaven roar. Fling wide your heavenly gates, here let your kingdom reign. Behold the glory King, honor his majesty. Fling wide your heavenly gates, throw high your praise and come away. Come awaken us to life again. There is no language that could ever form words around your grace. No amount of pages could describe what you've done inside this place. And there is no religion that could box you in, that could keep you in. No limit to your greatness. Oh, we can't help but sing. So open every door, let earth and heaven roar. Fling wide your heavenly gates, here let your kingdom reign. Behold the glory King, honor his majesty. Fling wide your heavenly gates, throw high your praise and come away. Come awaken us to life again. We've only just begun to see, only just begun to see your goodness. We've only just begun to sing, only just begun to sing your praise. Oh, we've only just begun to see, only just begun to see your goodness. And oh, I know we've only just begun to sing, only just begun to sing your praise. So open every door, let earth and heaven roar. Fling wide your heavenly gates, here let your kingdom reign. Behold the glory King, honor his majesty. Fling wide your heavenly gates, throw high your praise and come awake. So open every door, let earth and heaven roar. Fling wide your heavenly gates, here let your kingdom reign. Behold the glory King, honor his majesty. Fling wide your heavenly gates, throw high your praise and come away. Come awaken us to life again. Come away, come away.
Father of kindness, you have poured out grace. You brought me out of darkness, you have filled me with peace. Giver of mercy, you're my help in time of need. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, all your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. yes and amen. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, and all your promises are yes and amen. Oh, all your promises are yes and amen. Sweet thank you, Lord. We rest in you, God. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Oh, I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. Oh, all your promises are yes and amen. Oh, all your promises are yes and amen. One more time. Oh, all your promises are yes and amen.
Oh, you've come to bring peace, to be love, to be nearer to us. And you've come to bring life, to be light, to shine brighter in us. Oh, amen. You will guide with us. Our deliverer, you are Savior. In your presence we find our strength over everything. Our redemption, God, with us. You are God with us. Oh, you come to be hope to this world for your honor and name. And you've come to take sin, to bear shame, and to conquer the grave. Oh, Emmanuel, oh God, with us. Our deliverer, you are Savior. In your presence we find our strength over everything. Our redemption, God, with us. You are God with us. Oh. You are here, you are holy. We are standing in your glory. You are here, and you are holy. We are standing in your glory. You are here, you are holy. We are standing in your glory. You are here, Lord. You are holy. We are standing. we find our strength over everything, our redemption, God, with us, our deliverer, you are Savior. In your presence we find our strength over everything, our redemption, God, with us, you are God, with us, you are God, with us, you are God, with us. Yes, Lord. Thank you that you are with us. Thank you for how you walk with us. Thank you for showing us the beauty of life at all times, Lord, that you can turn even the hardest situations into something beautiful. You can teach us something beautiful in those moments, Lord. Thank you that you have the ability to do that, and that you love us that much to do that for us, Lord, to be there for us, to walk with us, to be our light and our hope and our guidance, and something to look forward to, Lord. Thank you that you have that relationship with us, Lord, and that you strive for that relationship with us. And I pray that each of us strive to have that back with you, Lord. Strive to meet you. Strive to know you. Strive to love you and to love like you, Lord. I just want to pray over all of us as we learn what it really means to have you with us, and to feel you with us, and to walk with you. We love you so much, and we love who you are, and we love what you teach us, Lord. And we love how you love us. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
I am so excited to introduce you to Mike Goldsworthy and to share this conversation that we had for our bonus summer mixtape today. Mike has become a very close friend over the last year, and somebody that I really look up to and admire. Somebody who is kind of pioneering this like quote unquote post-evangelical space as we attempt to navigate what a Jesus-centered faith looks like in kind of the modern world. Mike was a pastor for 19 years, including a senior pastor for 11 years at a church in California. As he has transitioned that church to a new senior pastor, he now works with pastors all over the country. And so we're going to have a great conversation about what it means to be a pastor, what's good about it, what's hard about it, and kind of how are we stepping forward into this as pastors in this modern world. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Mike. Well, good morning, everyone. I am here with Mike Goldsworthy, who's become a good friend over the last year. Hey, Mike, so glad you're on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Zach. Seriously, such an honor to be with you.
Oh, man, it's an honor is on our side, man. Well, I'm excited to hear from you and excited for our people to hear from you. So if you don't know Mike, I want to just give you a quick bio. So for 19 years, Mike Goldsworthy served on staff with Parkcrest Christian Church in Long Beach, California. For the last 11 of those years, he was the lead pastor, transitioning the church toward multiplication models of church planting and discipleship communities, while also shifting a largely homogenous church towards more diversity, helping create experiences for the church to live in the biblical tension of unity in the midst of diversity. And I love that, Mike. That's something we talk about a lot. Unity, not uniformity, and unity in the midst of diversity. So I love that you led an entire huge church through that process. It's a really beautiful thing. Currently, in addition to teaching as an adjunct professor of ministry and Bible at Hope International University, he teaches homiletics and ministry classes. He helps churches and church leaders engage with nuance and thoughtfulness and difficult conversations that they're not often having. He guides and mentors individuals as they walk through the transitions of deconstruction and reconstruction of their faith. Again, those are going to be terms that our people are really familiar with. We talk a lot about deconstruction and reconstruction. And I also want to say this is how Mike and I first connected. The next part is that he works with churches and leaders who are finding new ways for the church to move forward in post-evangelical realities. And then a little bit about his family. He and his wife, Allison, have been married for 20 years with 2 teenage children. In the summers, you'll often find them hiking, biking, and camping together, which is actually where he's coming from today. They're hanging out, doing some of that stuff right now. So, man, thanks for taking a break and coming on with us.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And gosh, that bio sounds so much longer when you're reading it than, or when you're saying it out loud than when you're reading it.
Oh man, it's I think it really does a good job of encapsulating what you're doing. I think, there are different kinds of bios, right? Some people are very packed with accolades and where they're published and what, all that stuff, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's really good. Yours is one of the ones that I think describes like what you actually do, one of the best ways that I've ever seen. So I love it. And like I said, Mike and I connected because of the work he does with churches and pastors in this kind of post-evangelical space, and have done a couple of different things together over the last year and got a couple of more things coming up. And so when we decided to add this bonus mixtape onto the end during our kind of big reopening sequence as we get back to meeting in person, you just were the perfect person, I thought, to talk to about pastoring, what it means to be a pastor. You've obviously been a lead pastor in a large church. You are now serving pastors all over the place in churches of various sizes and denominational affiliations and structures and leadership and all of that. And so I really wanted to, one of the most common questions I get all the time is, what's it like to be a pastor? And I get a lot of questions around what should pastors be like, right? What's it like to be a pastor, but what should pastors be like? Because for so many of our people, I know this is true of just people all over America, we've got very disparate interactions with pastors. You have what's portrayed in media, maybe what you've experienced as a kid or as an adult, maybe the pastor at your church or the pastor at your parents' church, different things like that. And it seems like it's a very, it's a diverse crew sometimes, what pastors end up looking like. So before we get into all of that though, would you tell us a little bit more about kind of your story and how you got into pastoring and how you got out of pastoring and all of that stuff?
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad to. Can I also say, like, gosh, I just feel such a resonance with you. The first time that we connected, uh, some of the work that you're doing, some of the stuff that's happening at Restore, that I just think it's so beautiful and are so many of the things that I care about, and just have loved watching from afar the work that you all are doing. Like, it's really significant, it's really important. It's really, even in some ways, I think, the leading edge of where the church is headed. And so I love communities like yours and the work that you're doing. I think it's just, it's risky and it's courageous and it's so important and needed right now. So yeah,
Thanks.
really, really grateful for you and
That
for your
means a lot
church.
to me. I really appreciate that.
So for me, I did not want to be a pastor. Like, I grew up in the church, but I never really wanted to be a pastor. I was going to be an architect. I was going to college to be an architect. And it was in the midst of that I felt a sort of calling into ministry. And I actually just kind of like shifted everything. I left what I was pursuing there. I changed schools so I could go get a degree in ministry and kind of went down that path. And I was going to be a youth pastor. I thought I was going to be a youth pastor forever. That, I thought I would be this like 80-year-old still hanging out with high school kids.
Yeah.
And that kind of changed along the way. But anyways, I got hired at this church called Park Crest. That's in Long Beach, California. And I came to be their high school pastor. A couple years into it, they asked me to change roles. I kind of changed roles along the way. And what happened was, at 29 years old, I ended up taking over the church as the lead pastor. And at that point, I was one of the youngest mega church pastors in the United States. So a few thousand people going to the church, multiple campuses, a couple $1 million budget, and a bunch of staff, all the whole deal.
Yeah.
But I had no idea like what I was doing. And at 29, like, I thought I knew what I was doing, that at 29, like, I was dangerous enough. Like, I had enough self-confidence, and I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, if that means anything to your folks. Yeah. Which is like really wonderful for leadership roles and really dangerous for leadership roles. And so I was a really immature 3 at 29 and didn't understand that. And I didn't know what I didn't know, all of that sort of stuff. And really, I was the picture that I've used to describe what happened for me there is that I was thrown into the deep end of a pool, not knowing how to swim, thinking I knew how to swim. I didn't know how to swim though. And there's a lot of people that were at the edge of the pool who were cheering me on, but nobody was jumping in to help me figure out how to swim. They're just like, yeah, you can do it. It's great. And leading in that space took its toll on me.
Sure.
There are things like, I was about a year into it as the lead pastor, and I was told by our leadership, like, hey, we don't want you to worry about our finances and details. Like, we know that's not your thing. Just lead, give us vision, teach, like, do that. And about a year into it, our finance team came to me and essentially was like, all that stuff that they said about not caring about finances, like, you need to care about it. We're pretty deep in the hole. This has been building for years before you took over, and you got to do something quick.
Wow.
And I had to lay off 10 people in a day.
Oh.
It's just like a horrific experience.
Yeah.
So I had experiences like that of that, and feeling like I was going through that alone. I caught our operations manager had been embezzling for like 7 years. And I just went crazy. Like I started, before I confronted her on it, I started like tailing her. Like, she lived 2 miles from me, and I would drive down her street, and if she was leaving, like, I'd follow her, because I was like, she's spending the church's money at Target or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to catch her in the act. And I had this moment where I was like, what is happening to me? It was, so I ended up in some like pretty like soul crushing places. I was in an unhealthy place, and the church was really gracious and gave me a sabbatical in the midst of that.
Wow.
And I came back from that sabbatical. So I took 4 months to just kind of rest and restore. And there was no production expectations. There was no like, because a pastoral sabbatical is different than an academic sabbatical.
Right. And
they get confused sometimes. And an academic sabbatical is to produce something.
Right.
It's like, you're going to do research on this. You're going to write this paper. You're going to teach these other kinds of courses.
Yeah.
But a pastoral sabbatical is about rest. It's about restoration and renewal. And so I did that, and I came back, and I told our elder board, I said, I think I have 5 years or less left in this role. I didn't have any clear, like, here's why.
Yeah.
But just kind of intuitively, I had this sense of like, I don't think I can keep leading this kind of church in this kind of way. And I don't know how to sustain this.
Yeah.
And it was about 3 years into that, that I was actually in the midst of a review with my elder board, with the chair and vice chair. And it was fine. But the vice chair asked some question towards the end of it. And I like had this breakdown that was totally unexpected. And I just said to them, I think I need to be done sooner rather than later.
Wow.
Which began moving me to this place of moving out of the church. And the way that I described it at the time, because I didn't fully understand what was going on, but I said, I don't think that I can continue to be lead pastor of this church and maintain a healthy soul.
Yeah.
So that was the best language I had for it. And I just read this morning, this quote, that it was in reference to Simone Biles.
Yeah.
And stepping out of her role in the team competition in the Olympics. And it said, you're not required to set yourself on fire in order to keep other people warm.
Wow.
And I just think that it was such a significant, like, that's what I was going through. And I think a lot of pastors experience something like that, where I felt like I was setting myself on fire to try and keep other people warm.
Yeah.
In hindsight, what my experience was, like what I've been able to sort of like having a bit of distance from it to understand what's happening, was that when I became lead pastor of the church and I had some overlap in who we were, but we were definitely different.
Yeah.
And I had thought what will happen over time is that the church and I, I'll be able to bring the church closer and closer to kind of where I am.
Yeah.
And what happened instead was, over time, the church moved a little bit, but it's incredibly hard to change a culture and without killing a culture.
Yeah.
And I thought I could transition a culture instead of killing it and birthing something new. And I realized in hindsight, like, you just can't do that. So instead, what happened is the church kind of changed a little bit, and I just kept growing further and further from it.
Yeah.
And the church's sort of like collective consciousness, I think, was frustrated with me because I wasn't the kind of pastor they wanted me to be. And I was growing increasingly anxious because I didn't feel like I could show up as my full true self.
Yeah.
And so we had this consultant come in at one point, And she says to me at one point, she goes, I would imagine that you are incredibly anxious.
Wow.
And I was like, I am. Like, I have just so much anxiety inside of me. Like, why would you say that? And she said, because as I'm doing these, like, she was doing these focus groups in our church. She goes, as I'm doing these focus groups in the church, and as I'm talking with you, it feels like in order for you to have led this church for as long as you have, you've had to tamper down and quiet a lot of who you are. Otherwise, you wouldn't have lasted this long. And if you're tampering down and quieting that much of who you are, like, you're just going to have this increasing anxiety.
Wow. Oh man.
Yeah, so that kind of led to me going through a process of leaving the church, and we left really well. And the elders and leadership of the church like was real. Like, I just think we both honored each other really well in that leaving, probably as best as we could.
Man, I really appreciate you sharing that story, and not just the kind of high points, but the low points, and also the real stuff about how you were feeling. I know there are 3 other people, right, who were really deeply affected this entire time, but Allison and your 2 kids, right? And so you have, I'm doing the math, right? So y'all been married for 20 years, and you did this for 19 years. So did you guys get married right before you came on staff?
We did. We went on our honeymoon, and 2 weeks later came on staff at this church. So we literally like grew up at this church.
So your entire marriage essentially is at this church. You give birth to and raise both kids at this church, all in the midst of what you're talking about. And so very similar to us in some ways, right? So now we planted, so it's a little bit different. We didn't have some of the cultural issues. We were setting culture from day one. But we moved, I was 26 when we moved here to start Restore. And my wife and I had been married for a little while, 5 years at the time, but we just had our first child. And in the last 6 years, we've had another child. We fostered 3 children. And it seems like we've grown up here too. Going from 26 to 32 is significant, as you talked about, right? You're kind of late 20s and moving away from that. So my question for you is for Allison and the kids, as they are experiencing all of this, I think one of the questions that probably needs to be asked more, but isn't, is not just how's your heart, but how is your family as they're walking through this? So what was that like for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one of the things that I think, like, if you're not in ministry, you don't get how integrated your whole life is in this thing. Because in most other jobs, like you and your spouse, you go off to your job and you come home and you debrief each other and you talk about it, but you're not in your spouse's business. Like, it's this thing that, like, you can talk about, but you have some separation from.
Yeah.
And your whole family is sort of in it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, like, I think we were probably about as healthy as we could have been in the way that we had created some boundaries. My most of the church, and a part of it was because of the size of our church, most of the church didn't know who my kids were. Allison was not somebody she's not kind of the pastor's wife that wanted to be on stage, leading women's ministry, things like that. And so she was as involved as she wanted to be. So she came to one worship service and would interact with her crew and would kind of leave that. But so a couple of things that kind of came out of it is that for both myself and for Allison, I felt like in the roles that we were in, there were always these guardrails up of like what you could think about, what you could process, the way you could understand even your faith. And because you felt like we can ask these things as long as we stay within these boundaries. And as soon as I wasn't in that role, it felt like those boundaries came down and we could begin a bit more of our own process in that. Yeah. And so within that there are, we're not currently like thrown in with any local church that we're engaging with as a couple, the 2 of us. And for some people, they've had a hard time with trying to make sense of that. But they're like, you always advocated for the significance of being involved in a local church. And it's like, what? I don't think that was untrue in the way I was advocating for that. And I'd still advocate for that. But you also don't understand the way that's been integrated in our life in a way that, like, to step out of it, it's like there's PTSD for both of us in some ways.
Sure, that makes sense. I think
yeah.
one of the things for us to navigate And I've talked to this a lot I talk about this a lot with other pastors, so I want to hear your opinion on it. You talked about the integration of your life, right? Like with you and Allison, and it centers around your job in the church. Another piece of that, though, right, is that most of your whole social circle centers around the church too. So all of your friendships and all of that stuff are deeply ingrained into this church community, whether that's a small group that you're a part of, or staff members that you're close with, or something like that. How did you guys navigate not just your entire professional life, but your entire social life being all connected in one place that you end up leaving?
Yeah. I mean, it's really been more difficult than we expected in some ways. We would say that like we're in the process of rebuilding a bunch of friendships, making new friendships. And we had to go through this process of realizing a few things. One was that for some people, I was a purveyor of religious goods and services for them,
Mhm.
and we had relationship, um, but the relationship was based off of me providing these religious goods and services for them. And when that was gone, somebody else was providing those religious goods and services, and the relational thing
Right.
moved over there. And I was able to realize like that's not bad.
Mhm.
That's just the reality of what is, and I can accept that. The thing that was maybe a little bit more difficult was people that we had like good, genuine friendships with. But in the midst of those, there was always this dynamic of relationship that we didn't realize existed, but that I was still their pastor. Um, and not only that, that this particular church like was the center point of what connected us.
Right.
So we changed the dynamic of our relationship by I was no longer their pastor, and we changed what the center point of what we related around. And all of a sudden, these friendships that were really good and significant, meaningful friendships became a lot more difficult. Some of them that it was just like they're really hard to maintain, and then some of them that we feel like we really have to fight to maintain. Yeah, and then some of it in the process of all of this, I think one of the things that was um, really difficult for me to realize, like I was going into ministry like naive in some ways of like, we're all going to do life together
Yeah.
and we're going to be like, this is going to be so meaningful. And then what would happen is like, gosh, there's this couple that we would go on vacations with, and they were really upset about some things I was doing in the church. And I remember the husband coming and telling me that I was being used as a tool of Satan to sow seeds of confusion in the church.
Oof.
And like, gosh, is that something that you say to your friends?
No, and I
Right? That
realize, right, like I think the religious goods and services is a great analogy. And sometimes I think I've had trouble with um, misassigning a relationship as far as the category that it's in, right? And I thought it was a deep, healthy relationship, even though the center point is the church, and even though there is a dynamic where I'm in a pastoral relationship or a boss relationship or whatever. But I still, I had it in kind of this deep relational category, but it really, for them, was that I was a provider of religious goods and services. And when the religious good or service that I provided was something that they deemed inappropriate or inconsequential or just even unhelpful, the immediacy of the pushback and the breaking of relationship, I'd never experienced anything like that in my entire life, including growing up and going to school and I'm thinking about like being a middle schooler and how volatile relationships are as a middle schooler, and they're still not as volatile as somebody you've walked with for years coming and saying, hey, you said this one thing on Sunday a couple of weeks ago, and like I know that you've walked me through deep counseling sessions and you have helped my family and blah blah blah, but like we're done because you said that and I can't get past it.
yes, and it's so like to be a pastor is to be vulnerable in so many ways. And not only are people being vulnerable with you in the things like counseling, but like every time you put yourself on stage, you are vulnerably opening yourself up to a group of people. That how many other places are people getting up on stage and saying like, here are some things that I believe about some of the deepest ways that we exist and what it means for us to. And so it's an incredibly vulnerable thing to do that. And then when somebody's like, you said this thing and it pushed me off, that it's like, it's this piece of you that you have exposed that now feels like it's being trampled all over. And it's being trampled all over in a way that like it feels to the other person like it's like, well, you just said this thing, and all I'm doing is we're having this conversation about this idea that was put out there.
Yeah.
But this idea that was put out there was by you just like opening yourself up.
Oh man, that's a really good way to think about it. I don't know if I've ever really categorized it that way, but that is super helpful, even just for me, listening to the way that you're describing that, because it does feel like that. I think every Sunday that I teach, getting up and now, especially with over the last year and a half of the pandemic, we've grown significantly online with people that are connected, deeply and marginally, but from all over the place, even outside of the United States. And so then it's even a more open to, I think, like random critique, where then there's no relational component.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a content, like you said, it's kind of content on their side. But for me, it does feel like I'm kind of letting you in on a counseling session I've had with God this week, and writing all this stuff and preparing it and opening it up.
Yeah, I think one of the phrases that I felt like described my experience really well is, have you used or heard the phrase "death by 1,000 paper cuts"?
Yeah.
That it's like, it's all these little things that like no one of them is kind of getting you, but over time it's just kind of cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting.
Yeah.
And it's all these like little things, but they just are hitting you in a way that it's like, it's like doing this damage on your soul that the other person doesn't intend.
Sure.
But because they don't understand necessarily, or they haven't experienced what it is to stand up and to bear your soul in that sort of a way, it's doing this thing to you.
Yeah, that's good, man. Okay, so you now work with pastors, and you do a lot of things, but one of the things that you do, and the way that we're connected, is that you work with kind of mentor, shepherd pastors all over the country. And this is a hilarious thing that happened to us last time we were together. But you took a group of pastors and we hung out with Stanley Hauerwas, who's a theologian, an amazing professor at Duke Divinity, and just kind of sat and learned from him. And he was kind of asking you, right, like, what's your real role here, Goldsworthy? Like, what exactly are you doing? And you kind of described kind of this, I'm just trying to help connect people and, talk about what it looks like to be a pastor and how we step into this post-evangelical space. And he said, oh, so you're the bishop. And so now I lovingly call you Bishop Mike. So in this kind of bishop role now that you have with pastors all over the country, what are the things that along these same lines you're hearing from them, the things that are really challenging in this specific season of being a pastor?
Yeah, gosh. This, I think, seems like it has been the hardest season for pastors. And I say, as somebody who I stepped out in the August before the pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this, like, for me, a kind of unique experience of, I was close enough to pastoring that I was watching people go through it, but I was able to stand outside of it. And I was watching folks who were just trying to like care for their people and figure out what do our people need in the midst of this, who are trying to navigate how do we lead our church through the pandemic. And what began to happen really quickly in that, like right at the beginning, for the first like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, people had a ton of like, but we're going to do whatever we need to do. And then there became this shift that happened, and it happened pretty quick and it happened pretty hard, where you had people that were like, if you're not opening up, you're letting the government dictate what the church gets to do. You don't believe in religious freedom. You don't trust the Spirit, like things like that. And then you had the other side, that if you're not being super restrictive, you're not loving your neighbor well. And it felt like pastors couldn't do anything right. And they were constantly receiving those critiques. And then in the midst of that, you obviously had the significant racial tensions that a lot of pastors like you were engaging in. But how hard is that to engage in from a distance over a screen, with conversations that require nuance and being in person, and the kind of incarnational bodily experience of being with other people around a table having difficult conversations? And that couldn't happen. And so we quickly devolved into echo chambers around that. You weren't saying something right. You didn't have the right people on stage saying these things. You didn't, whatever. And it very quickly allowed us to create just sort of like a distance from the actual personal engagement of it. And so I'm experiencing right now, pastors incredibly weary. And I think that's bearing itself out, not only in my personal experience with folks, but in the studies we're seeing. I think it was Barna that put out a study maybe about a month ago that said that 29% of pastors right now are giving serious consideration to leaving ministry. Just worn out, just tired, just feeling like they can't do anything right. This wasn't what they went into ministry for, to be a talking head on a screen, to figure out how to handle the like technology in this sort of way, and also to like have to navigate difficult conversations in ways where you couldn't actually be with people navigating them. So yeah, I mean, I think I've been walking with in the last year and a half, I think 4 pastors that I'm walking with that are stepping out of ministry entirely, not that are changing churches, but that have stepped out or are in the midst of stepping out entirely. And I think we're going to see a tidal wave of that over the next year or two of just pastors being like, I'm done. They're just tired.
Yeah, it does seem like that. I'm having anecdotal conversations like that with pastor friends a lot, who are just really attempting, I think, to get their churches back meeting in person somewhat consistently, and then are planning to step out. Even if they haven't really told anyone else that's kind of they feel a burden to get kind of everybody back together in person and then step away. And just for the Restore folks listening, I'm not one of those. I feel good about where we are currently. But it is a reality for a lot of folks that are walking in the space.
Yeah, it's kind of like you were running a marathon with this heavy weight on your shoulder, and you saw this finish line, and you're like, I just got to get to the finish line. I just got to get to the finish line. And the finish line is reopening the church with regular gatherings. And you got across the finish line, and then you collapse because the goal was to get to that line.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. Okay, so you're also working with pastors all over the country who are staying in ministry and continuing to even step deeper into pastoral roles or more expansive pastoral roles. And so Jen Hatmaker on her podcast, right, all the time asks the what's saving your life right now question. And so a version of that question for the pastors that you're working with, what currently is keeping pastors not just engaged with ministry, but excited about being a pastor and kind of the direction that they're leading in?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think, well, for several of the pastors I'm connecting with who have thought about stepping out and have a renewed, sort of refreshed vision, there's almost this, like, you're probably familiar with the story in Jeremiah 19, where Jeremiah is just sort of like the prophet. He's just like done. He's like, I'm out of it. And he says to God, like, the Hebrew is essentially like, you seduced me into this. I don't want to do this work, but you like conned me into it. You seduced me into it. And he says, every time I try to stop, it's like a fire that's shut up in my bones, and I just can't. Yeah. And I hear some sort of version of that. Yeah. At the sort of like practical level, what I'm seeing folks doing is there is a rise in the care about pastors' emotional health and pastors taking that seriously. And I think that's been really significant and really helpful. And so whether that's through counseling, whether that's through spiritual direction, whether that's through like different sorts of engagements, so programs like on-site intensives, things like that, where pastors are saying, like, I've got to care about being secure in who I am, understanding who I am, being able to not be codependent with my church, being able to have non-judgmental observation, all those sorts of stuff that comes with emotional health. I see pastors that are doing well in ministry right now, leaning into that really well. Wow. And I think along with that comes a sort of like relational health of like pastors who are developing good, deep, significant friendships that don't exist within their church, that are figuring out how to do that in your church. Like, I don't think you can pastor a church well if you're not developing those friendships where you're going to get hurt at some point by them. But they're finding really meaningful friendships outside of their church. And even like the normalization of Zoom and things like that have opened up the ability for those friendships to be all over the place. Yeah. So we're seeing that. I think we're also seeing pastors that are going like deeper in theology and wider in theology
Yeah.
and finding like real joy in that. And
Yes.
what I mean by that is we had a season where it became really normal in the church to go kind of really thin
Right.
theologically, and then but to also go really myopic theologically,
Mhm.
to be raised in a tradition and to learn from that tradition and to not see out of it. And this engagement with like the depth and breadth of the historical church, the global church worldwide. And so we're seeing pastors even giving themselves space and churches giving them space to like change their minds about things, to, as you talked about, like deconstruction and reconstruction. Like a lot of what I'm experiencing folks calling deconstruction is just simply people who've been raised with a myopic view of
Mhm.
theology in the church. And they're just starting to read other folks and they're realizing like, oh, the church is bigger and wider. And so I'm experiencing pastors like really finding some life in that,
Yeah.
in those sorts of experiences.
Man, that's awesome. I resonate with so much of that. I think so. Similar to you, we've got a leadership team that is half staff and half non-staff here at Restore. And then we have a board that are it's me and then all non-staff members, and they're also a part of that leadership team. And that board does a review, like you had talked about doing at Parkcrest, with me every year. And in at the end of year review in 2019, one of the kind of encouragements that they had for me was to really give counseling slash therapy a good shot. I'd given it a couple of early shots when we first moved here. It hadn't gone well. That they'd been connected to churches that like I was friends with the pastors, and it quickly became like a peer relationship instead of like a counseling relationship. And so I'd kind of written it off and just said, well, I guess, I love counseling and therapy. I encourage it for everyone. We often pay for it for church members who are walking through difficult things. But for me, maybe it's just something I can't really have. But thankfully, my board really leaned on me and said, I think this is something you should really invest in. And so I started it, weekly therapy counseling at the beginning of 2020, having no idea what was coming, right? And I tell you, it's been one of the life-saving things for me over the last year and a half, is having this place every week to process through what's going on, whether that's past things, childhood things, or the present day things that are happening day in and day out of my job, and the deep connections between those. And so that's been hugely helpful. The other thing that I resonated with, what you said, was about the deconstruction and reconstruction journey, and not just walking through that myself, which I feel like I've been on some level of for the last 12 years probably. But now being able to walk our whole church through it together and say, how are we building the foundation on the person and work of Christ? How are we examining these different parts of our faith and either choosing to set them aside or replace them with something that's more true? And that process. I think I've done it in a lot of kind of one-off ways with people as they'd come for, help or whatever, but getting to do it with our entire church in some level has been really life-giving and beautiful.
I love that.
And then the last thing that I resonate with that you talked about was these relationships outside of church. And again, just a shout out to you. You've been a part of that, even over these last few months, getting to know you, getting to know some of the other pastors that you're connected with, getting to spend some time with you guys last month in Raleigh. And it's just really beautiful that those connections are happening. And so I want to ask you, as we kind of move forward in the future of pastor, in the future of kind of the church in America, what do you see on the horizon for pastors, for leadership, for the church? You in your bio had this post-evangelical word that's in there. Is that something that you see us taking steps toward as a church community and as pastoral leaders?
Yeah, it's one of them. So like and it's the one that I'm most passionate about, which is why I lean into it. When I'm being objectively honest, I think that there's I think we're going to see fundamentalism continue to grow. We've seen fundamentalism. One of the problems that's happened in evangelicalism is that fundamentalism has started to take it over. And without you've had much better guests on to explain these sorts of things than me, but evangelicalism was this big wide tent that over the last decade or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, has been overtaken in some ways by fundamentalism, and so has sort of shifted. And I think we'll continue to see that happen. We'll continue to see a growing movement there. I think that we'll continue to see, though, this growing movement of folks that in some way have been shaped by evangelicalism, but find its current expression lacking for them. And maybe the simplest way of saying it is that the way that we were taught to follow Jesus in those spaces is not the way that we are being encouraged to follow Jesus in those spaces still. And so we don't feel like we fit there anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm just finding a growing number of pastors who are growing out of that, and along with them, more and more folks who are looking for a space that are like, I still deeply care about the church, and I still deeply care about following Jesus, and I feel like I can't do that in my church anymore. So I think we'll see this season of churches that are kind of moving in that reality. And then what will happen is that a season will need to come out of that where there will be people who are not being raised in evangelicalism, that are being raised in other sorts of spaces, that church will have to figure out, like, how do we shift and change and adapt in order to meet that need. But I think in this current context, that's the space that I think gives me the most hope, I would say, for the church.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think inadvertently, planting 5.5 years ago, I think in a lot of ways we almost started in that space, unknowingly started in that space, and have continued to lean into it more and more. And I think the description you gave earlier of a place where we go wide and deep theologically and biblically, deep into the scriptures, really trying to understand what they mean, who wrote them, who they write them to, the context, the culture, the timeless truths that are in them, going wide and deep with that, all centered around Jesus, but also still holding on to some of the traditions of church that we grew up in, the accessibility of being able to walk into a place and listening to a band and participating in worship and having a message that is easily accessible, and having really engaging, awesome things for kids and families and stuff like that. It's like this kind of, because I've felt over the last few years questions about, should I be in a more like mainline type of a place? And I've got great friends in mainlines, and I have zero problem with that. And we actually commissioned a guy out and his wife who ended up at Princeton, and now he's a PCUSA pastor, and they're incredible, and he's doing his thing. But that's just never felt like a comfortable space for me, even though I resonate with the deep and wide theology of what's happening there. And so I love this this opportunity of whatever it ends up being called or looking exactly like. I love that not only is it happening, but that we've got people like you that are passionate about helping us all connect in it.
Well, I'm really grateful for folks like you, because the work of the local church is so hard and significant, and that it can be just a theoretical idea, and there's got to be boots on the ground that are connecting with folks in the reality of what does it look like to walk through this, to create new kinds of churches for the new kinds of spaces that we're in, to figure out, like, what does it actually look like to live in the way of Jesus in our time and our place. And like, those are not easy questions to have to work out in the reality of people's lives. Like, and just so anyways, all that to say, like, I think the work that you're doing is really, really significant and really, really important. I'm so grateful for Restore and for your church. Like, it's just so good.
Thanks, Mike. We are grateful for you too. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for your time today, man. Especially for your vulnerability and sharing what life has been like over the last 20 years, what it's like now, the highs, the lows. One of our core values here is authenticity, and you just embody that so well. And I appreciate you bringing your whole authentic self onto this mixtape, man. So yeah, as we close, I'd love to just ask you to pray for us and for all the things we just talked about, and for this new space for the person and work and love and hope and joy and grace of Jesus to continue to go out in beautiful and new ways, and that Restore and all the churches that you work with would be a part of that.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It really is a gift and an honor. And yeah, if I could offer as a prayer a blessing that's from this church called the Northumbria Community. It's in Ireland. They really grab a hold of the Celtic tradition, and in thinking about going deep and wide, one of the things that's been significant for me over the last many years has been to find places that are engaging in, like, what are the prayers that have been written historically? What are the prayers that are being written today that sort of like resonate with where I'm at? And this is one that I found a lot of resonance with, and I found a lot of resonance in offering to churches. So if I could offer this to you all, Restore, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you. May he send you wherever he may go. May he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to you, Restore.
Amen. Mike, thank you again, brother.
Thank you again, Mike, for being on today. Just so much wisdom. I'm so thankful for you, for your friendship, and for you sharing with our church family. We don't have an after party today, but next week, as I said, we'll be back in person at Lively Middle School. In addition to live streaming, we're going to be talking about why I'm a part of church. This little two-part series. This is the second part. Last Sunday, we talked about why I'm still a Christian today, or next Sunday, we're going to be talking about why I'm still a part of church. And like I said, for all of the issues and struggles that exist in churches today and in kind of the modern American church, we still believe that being a part of healthy, Jesus-centered community is vitally important. And I don't even say that just as like a checkbox to like make God happy. I don't think it works like that at all. This is something that is good for us to be a part of, and that church actually has so many beautiful benefits for us as individuals and as a community. So I hope you join us for that. I hope to see you next Sunday live and in person at Lively Middle School, 10 a.m. or online, Facebook and YouTube will be streaming again. See you then.